welcome, first of all, Dr. Umesh Kumar, uh, like my younger brother. So we are very grateful to you, Miss, for accepting our invitation, for taking up your time from your busy schedule. So first, let me tell you something about Dr. Umesh. Uh, you see, he has done his master's and PhD from English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad, and with the famous translator of India, Professor Maya Pandit. And his PhD work is on the honor killing, phenomenon of honor killing in North India. And from since 2015, he is a faculty member in the Department of English, Banaras Hindu University. And apart from teaching canonical courses in British literature, he is a practicing translator and works with the following language pairs: Hindi, English, Marathi. Uh, so he has been trained at leading translation schools of the world. Notable among them are NIDA School of Translation Studies, Italy, and the British Centre for Literary Translation, the University of East Anglia, UK. He identifies himself a committed translator. So, in addition to that, from for 2019 and 20, Dr. Umesh has been or was a British Council Charles Wallace Visiting Fellow at the University of Edinburgh, UK. And he has equally published essays and research papers in some very prestigious journals like Sahitya Academy, Translation Today, Contemporary Voice of Dalit Says, Book Review, Indian Literature, Vani Prakashan, The Hindu, Wire. There is a long list of his publications in some very reputed nations and you see international places. So in addition to that, if I was looking at the you see CV of Dr. Umesh, so he has really a very impressive you see record in very short span of time, as you see as I was looking at. So you see he has been as I told, visiting fellow at British Centre for Literary Translation, University of East Anglia, and he has also been associate fellow at NID, and he has also garnered some awards, honors, fellowships from different prestigious institutions like Junior Research Fellowship, UGC sponsored startup grant for new faculty members. And in addition to that, he has 2 books to his credit in translation. Specifically, one book there is Ramdas Misra's Aag Ki Hansi. It was awarded a Sahitya Academy Award, and Dr. Umesh, he translated this work as titled "The Laughing Flames and Other Poems." And another book that he got translated, that is on children's literature, Kissson Ki Duniya, I think from Marathi. Yes, it was from Marathi, I think, Marathi children's story. Yes. So these 2 books he has translated. In addition to that, he has a long list of publications here, and really, Umesh, it is congratulations for in such a short span of time you have such impressive record, and really it is praiseworthy, and we are privileged here to have you as our speaker, distinguished speaker. So so now not taking much time here. First I would like to invite our head of the department, Dr. Shantanu Ghosh, for a welcome, sir.
Can you hear me?
Sir, you are mute, sir. Please unmute yourself.
No, I have. Now, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, it's okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So it is a great pleasure to host Dr. Umesh Kumar from Banaras Hindu University to deliver this webinar for our Thursday seminar/webinar series, and we are looking forward to his talk on the translation theory and practice as a practitioner himself and as a theoretician of translator, how he looks at the process of translation. I may use the privilege accorded to me by my colleague, Dr. Anil, to just set the ball rolling. I would like to point out one thing is that translation is a very, very involved process. It's a cognitive process. It's a kind of a major stepwise mechanism by which you decode the source of communication, you interpret it, and at the same time encode it in another system. So when you go from one language to another language, there are some cognitive processes that take place. Apart from that, there are some very, very directed cultural issues which need to be taken into account by the translator. And if you combine these and many others, I'm sure that Dr. Umesh will bring it up in his talk. So the translator's task is not only to convert information from one system into another. It is also to preserve in a kind of a sense with which it had been in the first place. But obviously, there are a lot of times when the translator faces a dilemma as to how to translate certain untranslatables or something which will try and preserve the cultural ethos of the original work. So making these decisions, taking these decisions on the fly when the process of translation is going on, it is basically, the translator actually creates another, literary work. So there are a lot of, processes that go on. And there is a lot of theoretical that has been done in both, aesthetics and linguistics, as well as in literary theory, in this important area of translation. Now, to make the long story short, also, why we are having this discussion on translation is basically also the new education policy emphasizes a lot on the Indian languages, the education in Indian languages. And we know the situation in the country is that although there are a lot of books and material available in English, not much material is available in role in the 20th century as a knowledge center in the world. We are doing. We have to take into account, a lot of huge translation-based exercise. And so this area becomes very, very important, not only in terms of theorizing, but also in the domain of computer science and computational linguistics, which opens up a completely entirely new domain of artificial intelligence. So with these words, I hand over the floor to Dr. Umesh, welcoming him again to deliver his talk. Dr. Umesh.
Thank you. I sincerely hope that I'm audible and everybody is able to hear me.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. So let me begin quickly by thanking the people at Akal University and Professor Shantanu Ghosh for giving me a warm welcome. And I'm no less thankful to my brother Anil for inviting me so that I could share some of my thoughts on a very important and enterprising field of inquiry called translation studies. Let me begin by giving you a map of what I'm going to do today. So the structure of my talk is such that a beginner will be able to enjoy it. And I will also make an attempt to see that those who are already initiated in the field, they also get some food for thought. So the title of my talk is very simple. It says that I'm going to speak on translation studies, but the perspective that I'm going to use is that of a translator, and more particularly that of a practicing translator. Now, when we talk about translation, I don't think that any of us, those who claim themselves as Indians, are unfamiliar with this word or unfamiliar with this term. because I firmly believe that in India, we are never born with one language. We are actually born with multiple languages, and over a period of time, we also get habitual of learning quite a few. But my purpose is not to talk about the practice of languages in the sociological domain. Rather, I'm going to talk exclusively on how languages are employed in the academic transactions, and more particularly in the transaction that we call as translation. Now, if one wants to understand translation, one has to now academically go to translation studies. Now, what is translation studies? Uh, to actually cut a very long story short, to my mind, translation studies is an umbrella term that houses many concerns, but I would categorize those concerns in three different parameters. I am putting this to you that when somebody says that somebody works in translation studies, somebody might be working primarily on these three levels. One is that of translation history. Other one is that of translation theory. And third one is that of translation practice. So the wider rubric of translation studies, although is very huge, but these are the three fundamental predominant concerns that we actually encounter in translation studies. So when you say translation history, we actually go back to our historical past and try to find out how the activity or the exercise of translation was being done, how it was being received, and what kind of impact that it had. For example, if you understand the history of translation in the Western world, you'll find that it had to do a lot with the translation of Bible in those years. So as a result, the Western consciousness on translation, about translation, is heavily influenced by the translation of Bible. And of course, you know this long story of the rupture that happened in Christianity between Catholics and Protestants. And one of the key reasons for that was the availability of Bible into vernacular languages, the translation of Bible from Latin to other European languages. But in the Indian context, we do not have a linear kind of a justification for the history of translation. So there's no doubt that we have been practicing translation for a very long time. One is not able to see a concrete history of translation in the Indian scenario. So in the academic sort of domain, when we speak about the history of translation, normatively in our Indian classrooms, we talk about the history of translation from the Western perspective. Of course, of late, there have been attempts to construct some kind of an Indian history of translation. For example, National Translation Mission brought out a book, but this is some kind of a sporadic sort of collection of what was going on in different Indian languages, not the history of translation the way we understand that it is to be written in the modern sense of history. When we talk about translation theory, again, we heavily depend on the Western world. So many theories of translation that are commonplace in the Indian classrooms are theories that have been given to us by the Western academicians. For instance, domestication, foreignization, the idea of faithfulness. And since in the Western hemisphere, it was the translation of a religious text called Bible, there's so much of attachment of the idea of faithfulness that you see in the Western world. But in the Indian context, this whole idea of faithfulness at times is taken for a ride. For example, in Marathi, we have, people, the Marathi saint poets, actually translating the Bhagavad Gita with a very liberal kind of an outlook. So in the Indian context, again, although we depend on the Western theories of translation, but if we will have a concrete setup where we are able to bring out our own theories of translation, and I hope that someday we will, I think our theories of translation will be very different from the theories of translation that we are familiar now from the Western world. For example, in the Indian context, if we translate the word translation, it would be anuvad, which can be further bracketed into two different words, and it is a thought exercise for you. You will find that the understanding is completely different. Then you have bhashantar as another word for translation. Then you also talk about understanding the emotion, the anuvad of the bhavana. That is also part of the Indian understanding of translation. So the point that I'm making with this comparison between the Western sense of translation and in the Indian sense of translation is precisely to bring home a point that there is no need that we have to entirely bank upon the Western episteme in order to understand the idea of translation in the Indian context. And I think with that stance in mind, I think translation theory and translation history has so much of opportunity for the younger people like us and quite a few of you who are listening to actually launch ourselves on this kind of a green field where so much of work is still waiting to be done. But my emphasis today is on the third part, that is the practice of translation. So, for instance, when a text is being picked up by somebody, what is the strategy to pick up a text? What goes on in the mind of a translator? What is the agency of the translator? What is the subjectivity of the translator? And so on and so forth. And what are the challenges that any practicing translator will face in India while getting into this field? Now, it is very ironical that if you see the translation activity that has been done historically throughout the world, for a very long time, the identity of the translator was very invisible. Okay, so you will never have the name of the translator being put up on the cover of the text. For a very long time, the translators were working anonymously, although texts have been continuously translated, but the subjectivity and the identity of the translator has historically been absent. So it is around the 1970s, to be very precise, or around the 1980s, that in translation field, we have a term called the cultural turn. Okay, so when the cultural turns come into being, when there's a discussion about the cultural capital that is involved in translation activity, you will find that the translator also gets now some kind of visibility. So the invisibility of the translator has now been corrected with by bringing the translator very much on the scene of the translation exercise. Now, as a practicing translator, what I'm supposed to do today, I can actually take some kind of an objective stance and say that, okay, these many translators are working and this is what they have worked upon and this is their politics and this is their ideology and so on and so forth. But I'm not going to do that. I am actually going to take a very autobiographical kind of a stance in order to talk about the experiences of a translator. Now, many of you might argue that how dare I speak about my own experiences as the experiences of the translators in India. I understand the methodological problem there, but whatever are the methodological problems, I would like to put myself in the frame, because I feel that, as Professor Shantanu was also saying, I personally feel that translation is actually a very involved kind of an activity. it is very difficult to take the biography of the translator out of the scene. So, however, we are all habitual to the idea of empirical setting and objectivity and all that. I'm actually going to take some kind of freedom, and I'm going to discuss with you my own experiences of translating a couple of volumes and also some short stories and all that. But before I launch onto that, I must also give a disclaimer about what kind of translation activity that I'm going to talk today. Now, translation is actually now a very big project. Translation is now happening in almost every imaginable kind of situation. Okay, so translations are happening in the medical field, in the agricultural field, in law, and of course in many other fields like medicine and all that. And if you go to Mysore, people at Mysore's National Translation Mission actually call these kind of translations as knowledge text translation. Okay, so for example, if you have a history book that is written by Romila Thapar in English, then there are translators who are involved, who are translating that history book into different Indian languages. So they are actually considering that that kind of a history is actually written on the basis of evidence. So there is empirical value of that book. So they are calling these kind of translations as knowledge text translations. So I'm not talking about knowledge text translations as such. I'm not talking about translation of history books or books of sociology or biology books or something like that. I'm going to talk about the translation of literary text. Now, as the name is very much self-evident, by literary text, I'm trying to mean the translation of, say, novel or short story or poem or drama or something like that. And this is not what I'm saying, but many translation theorists and practitioners, they actually say that translating a literary text is actually one of the most challenging kind of jobs. Because when you translate the knowledge text, when you translate a history book or a sociology book, the main intention and the main emphasis for the translator is actually to transfer the message the way it exists in the source text. So there is not much involvement of the translator as such, apart from transferring in a literal sense. But when you take up a literary text, when you take up a text which is written in a local Indian languages, or a text that employs a heavy traffic of how people speak, the dialects in a literary text, then it really becomes very difficult to translate, because literary texts employ a very heavy traffic of cultural connotations. And as a result, translating a literary text could also be very challenging and at times nightmare for a translator. So I'm going to bank on the literary text for today's talk, and I will tell you how we get initiated into it and how we actually proceed from one point to the other, and what are the choices that we make. So in translation theory, now the subjectivity or the position of the translator has acquired some meaning. And as a result, in translation studies, now you have a separate field of inquiry called the sociology of the translator. So who is translating, why somebody is translating, what is the background of the translator, why the translator is actually translating this particular text in this particular time and period. So now in translation theory, all these things are not being considered value free. There is a value attached to it. And of course, now the translator has acquired some kind of the prominence, so to speak, in the translation exercise, which was hitherto denied to him or her. So now I'm trying to share my screen. I hope that it is visible to you now. Are you able to see?
Yes, Dr. Umesh, it is visible. Yes. Yes, it is.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay. So let me begin by sharing a contract that a translator has to do with the publisher. Okay. And I think there are some ideas that you will be able to see there. So this is the copy of the contract that I did with Sahitya Akademi in order to translate a volume for them. Okay, so this was actually a commissioned translation. Okay, so now the first point for us to learn is that there are different kinds of translation exercises. One is the commissioned one, and the other one is the choiced sort of work. Okay, so are you able to see this particular page now where it says one of the programs?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, this is the letter of that agreement, and please read this with me and see what is expected of a translator. It says, one of the programs of the Sahitya Akademi is to publish translation of books, including its own publications and classics, into all the major languages of India. Needless to say, a good translation, and this is the significant bit, so please note it. Needless to say, a good translation should be as faithful to the original as possible without sacrificing lucidity and vigor of expression. So when you actually get into a commissioned work, there is always a plethora of expectations that is being put on the translator. Now you see that here it is clearly mentioning that you have no chance to actually tinker with the original. So this whole idea of fidelity and being faithful to the original text is a bit problematic, because this was a poetry book that I was doing. And Aag Ki Hasi is actually a poetry book. Now, if one is very faithful to the original, what might will happen? I will just try to show you the first poem of that collection, and maybe that will be clear to you. But I'll just would like to scroll it down to actually make it visible to our young friends that how a translation contract looks like. Now, these are the terms and conditions that one has to follow. And if you will read it as a whole, I have no problem in sharing it with Anilji if students are interested. If you will read this entire contract, you will find that it is heavily tilted against the translator. Now, tilted against the translator, I will come back to this point, because this is, I'm putting in single inverted commas, not to be entirely understood in a negative sense, but it is tilted against the translator, more particularly the choices that the translator might make while translating a book. Now, this is the first poem of that collection. So, Anil bhai, can you see it?
Yes, Umesh.
Okay, and please help me. Can you just read the poem, because it is in Hindi?
Okay. आग की हंसी, ये शीर्षक है कविता का। जी नहीं, चूल्हे की आग से तो गरम गरम रोटियां निकलती हैं, जो बुझाती हैं पेट की ज्वाला और धीरे धीरे आदमी की हंसी बन जाती है। आप जरा आईना देखिए श्रीमान, आपकी शीतल शालीन हंसी से कैसे धीमी धीमी आग फूट रही है और धीरे धीरे अपनी लपेट में ले रही है दिशाओं को महाज्वाला बनकर। फिर भी आपकी माया है कि लोग समझते हैं आग चूल्हे ने लगाई है। आपकी माया कितनी हसीन है माया।
Yeah, so when you will read this poem for the first time, you will get some idea that this poem is actually talking about uh, the class divisions. It is actually talking about the worker and the mechanism that is always there to exploit uh, the workers. Now, I will show you what happens when you faithfully translate. Okay, so this was the first translation. I hope you are able to see it.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is how I translated this poem in my first draft. No, it is not the way it seems. So now you can see that it is exactly a faithful translation of the Hindi version. No, it is not the way it seems. The fire of hearth, in fact, produces only the hot and blazing rotis, those that extinguish the fire of the belly, and slowly and gradually these rotis make their appearance in the man's laughter. If you wish to witness this laughter, look into your mirror, gentlemen. There you will see how gently and slowly the fire is making an appearance through your calm and sober laughter, and how slowly and gradually it is taking over all the directions of the world into its lap by turning itself into the mighty fire. And full credit to your mystery, for people still think that the hearth started the fire. Your mystery is beautiful, oh mysterious. So you will find that it is almost an exact translation of the source text. Not only the way these sentences are constructed, but also the economy of the words. In fact, if you will count the words from the original to the translation, the number of words would always be similar. But it is not giving the kind of impact that is there in the original. So another attempt was done. It was actually edited by one of my students who actually identifies himself as a practicing poet. Okay, so what he did, he actually shortened it so that it suits to the taste of the English readers. Okay, so now you see what the translator has to keep in mind. He has to think about being faithful to the original text. He also has to think about the potential readers who are going to read, because the readers might not have any access to the original, so they should enjoy the text. So you'll find that the translator is actually venturing into different directions, and it is very difficult to actually make choices. Okay, so this was something that was edited by him, and I was not very happy with it. I almost had no liking for it, because it seems as if this poem is not a translation, but it was written in English. Now this is again a very significant bit, that if the translation reads better than the original, then it should not be termed as a translation. So it is like some kind of a rewriting of the original, where the original poet is almost made invisible. So as a translator, I actually have a distaste for these kind of brutality with the original text. Okay, so what I did, I actually created another draft, which eventually went into the final sort of output, the published book. And there you will see that I am actually improvising on something. You can see that there are two capital sentences where actually I'm making it clear for the English readers as to who are in conversation. Okay, so I have actually capitalized the man's laughter, which is basically the representation of the working class group, the worker. And your laughter is actually the capitalist kind of machinery that controls the whole production system. And there you'll find that now it has this sense of the original, but then it is also being put into a target language, which people will be able to identify and will be able to make a distinction. So now you can read it. I cannot be befooled, for I know the fire of hearth produces only hot and blazing rotis. Rotis that extinguish the fire of the belly and slowly and gradually transcend into man's laughter. But your laughter is not the same. Look into your mirror, gentlemen. There you will see how gently and slowly a different fire is making an appearance through your calm and sober laughter, and how slowly and gradually it is engulfing all the directions into its lap by turning itself into a mighty fire. And full credit to your mystery, for people still think that the hearth unleashed the fire. Your mystery is beautiful, oh mysterious. So at the end, the poet has turned into a very sarcastic kind of a tone. And this is what the original poem also tries to convey to the readers in Hindi. So in a way, what I was trying to interpret with this example is that a translator has to be a very conscious person. A translator has to make informed choices, because if a translator is not conscious, then the translator might end up doing injustice with the text. I shall give you an example of what kind of injustice that we can sometimes do to the target text. All of us know Premchand. Premchand is a very significant Hindi writer. In fact, often called as the greatest Hindi writer. He has more than 300 stories to his credit. And Penguin, I think in 2017 or 2018, decided to bring all the short stories written by Premchand into English. So Penguin actually launched a 4-volume omnibus kind of a thing for all the short stories of Premchand into English translation. And when I received the copies of those 4-volume set, just by stroke of luck, I just picked up 1 volume, and the first story that I could lay my hands on was the story titled Sawa Ser Gehu. And when I read the story Sawa Ser Gehu into English, the Penguin English, I was really, I was not happy at all, because I had read the Sawa Ser Gehu when I was in school, and then I also read it when I was in college and all that. And I realized that the translator has not done the kind of justice that the story deserves. Because in that story, Premchand, while talking about the plight of farmers and how farmers actually turn into slaves under the zamindari and the landlord system, and there is no way out for them. In fact, at the end of the story in Hindi, Premchand says that, dear readers, please don't think this story to be an imaginative story. This is actually a real story, and Shankar is the protagonist of that story, and he says that there are many Shankars around us. Okay, so in a way, under the guise of a literary representation, this was actually a social document. So when we talk about the condition of farmers today, and if we want to know what is the history of peasantry in India, and if one goes back to that story, one will find that as if Premchand is writing for the farmers of today. And I think the audience that we are speaking to, predominantly coming from the agricultural backgrounds, will understand this problem of me as a translator. So I would request you to actually have a look at that story and how it has been translated into the Penguin edition. But what I did, and this is again a significant lesson for all of us. So when a translator feels that justice has not been done with something that has come out in translation, we should not say that this is a good translation or a bad translation. You might have noticed that I'm not using that word deliberately. In translation, there is nothing called good translation or bad translation. In translation, there is always another translation. So if you are not happy with something, you must translate it yourself. And perhaps you will make an attempt to correct the problems that you faced in the text that you have read. And that is the reason that you'll find that there are significant number of texts which have been translated multiple times by multiple translators. Now, I will actually show you what I did with that story. And I hope that you will be able to see the kind of thing that I was trying to correct there. Okay, so are you able to see the text now?
Yes.
Anil bhai?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so this is my version of that story. Now, in the Penguin version, it is translated as the original title of the story is Sawa Ser Gehu. So the Penguin translation literally translated the title as the quarter seer of wheat. Okay, I have not done that. In fact, I have actually translated it in a different way. I have almost reworked on the title of the story. I have translated it as The Bond of Slavery. Because when you will read the text, you will find that it is not about just Sawa Ser Gehu. It is about how the Sawa Ser Gehu becomes inevitably the instrument of slavery from which this farmer and his future generations will never be able to come out. And you can just find this story on the Google, and it was published by Translation Today. And you'll find that I have actually given a lot of information in the footnotes there. Okay, usually I do not translate this way, but I have translated this story because I consider this more than a story. I actually consider this as a sociological document on India's struggles with the problem of peasantry. And you will find that I have given absolute details of where it was published for the first time. So it was published in 1924 and how subsequently it was being put into other volumes and all that. And you will also find that all these words, these local words, have been duly attended to in the footnotes. In fact, you'll find that there is heavy footnoting in this translation, and that is very deliberate. And when you provide a text, this kind of para text, this is what para text is, support kind of a system. The idea is very simple. I actually, as a translator, do not want to take any risk. And as a result, I have given full attention to every word, because I am of the opinion that if a policymaker reads this story, he should be able to understand every concern that the original writer wanted to convey. So the point I'm making here is that of commitment to the translation activity. And this is what I mean when I say that I identify myself as a committed translator. So that committed translator is actually always trying to ensure that justice prevails even in translation. And you know that in the modern life that we are part of, justice and ensuring justice remains the biggest sort of goal for mankind. So I think as translators, we are also very much part of this thing. Carrying on with this discussion, Anil Bhai actually informed all of you that I worked on honor killings for my PhD. And that was the reason that actually got me into translation scene. Now, when I'm talking about India's translation scene, I'm not actually arguing that I know all of it or I know it entirely. I'm actually talking about India's translation scene, the way I observe it, the way I see it, the way I'm part of it. And I think as translators, we actually have to commit ourselves with the knowledge system that we have, because then only we will be able to connect our local with the global. And this is what is also the mandate of the new education policy, that we should actually become global, not by demeaning our own knowledge system, but trying to bring out the best that we have and also trying to intake the best that they have, rather than surrendering completely to their epistemology. Now, I will give you a very powerful example, and I think this would be an eye-opener for all of us as to what our English writers do. Okay, I'm talking about Indian writers who write in English. And this is my hypothesis, that when Indian writers write in English, they never ever write for Indians. They actually write for people who are not Indians. And in the process, they actually end up doing some injustice to the kind of things that they are trying to represent. Now, let us take this concept of honor killings. There are quite a few Indian English writers who have written novels on honor killings. And I will show you what do they write when they write on honor killings. Okay. Just 1 minute. Anil Bhai, I hope that I have some time left. Okay. So, just to give you an idea about the kind of work that I did. These are the lessons from the work that I did for my PhD, that I actually looked into honor killings from the perspective of intercaste and intra-gotra marriages. And these were my takeaways, that honor is actually an ideology and it gets constructed through day-to-day rituals. When you kill somebody for the sake of honor, that is also a message, patriarchal message, which tries to create all these things like asserting power and all that. And men's honor is actually not there. The honor of men is actually deposited in the body of the female, was another significant sort of inference that I could get from my PhD work. So this was broadly the idea that I developed in my PhD. And in one of my chapters, I actually discussed the literary representation of honor in literature. And this is an example of a few of those texts. And this is actually from two English novels. Okay, I will not read all of it, but these are passages from two English novels written on honor killing. On the left of your screen is the novel called Come Before the Evening Falls. On the right is another novel called For Honor. Okay, so I am actually reading from the right hand side, the second paragraph. Okay, and those who are listening to me, they have to actually participate, and they have to tell me something after I read this passage. It says, the nows we know, the nows were a caste of barbers. Though they were not untouchables, they were low down in the caste structure. The Constitution of the Republic of India may have denounced the caste system and declared the old custom of untouchability illegal, but to erase centuries of deep-rooted beliefs was like wiping the slate clean of a whole social system. Okay, don't get into all of this. Whatever I have highlighted in red ink, do you think that any Indian reader is not in possession of this knowledge that is being given by the novelist? Yes. If you read this paragraph, it is written in such a way as to tell us that it is actually written for somebody who has no idea about India, because the protagonist is actually coming from a barber's community and all that, and the love is between a person from a barber's community and a high caste person, the couple. So this is what I'm trying to say, that when you see these English novels, they actually represent honor and honor killing in a very, very sophisticated way, not in the realist way which any writer who's writing in the Indian languages will do. So in a way, I'm trying to say that the lacuna of Indian writing in English is continuously exposed by writers who are writing in Indian languages or Bhasha writing. Just think about the most significant novel that is written in English on the Dalit problem. We are still canonizing Mulk Raj Anand, his novel, The Untouchable. But if you go into Bhasha languages, there are much more powerful novels and collection of poems that have come out on the Dalit problems. So in a way, I'm trying to say that Indian writing in English actually suffers from a problem where it is always trying to, sometimes I might say that could be a very unconscious decision, that it is trying to cater to the foreign taste and foreign tongue. In fact, you will find that in the English novels, the killing scene is actually not being described, because it is a possibility that the Indian writers in English must have thought that the foreign audience will not be ready for that kind of graphic violence. But when you go to Indian writers, for example, writers who have been writing in Hindi, there is this short story that I translated by Ramnika Gupta called Daag Diya Sach. It was published in Sahitya Akademi's Indian Literature. And if you read this long story, it is also an honor killing. You will be able to understand the massive difference that exists in knowledge that is being produced on social problems in Indian languages, and the same kind of topic, how it is dealt with in the Indian English scenario. And if we really want to understand the problem in its with all its trajectories, I think we should always go back to Indian writing in Indian writers who are writing in Bhasha languages, because there exists the true knowledge, and as a result, this also tells us that how important translation activity is for us. So yeah, I'm just stopping. So Anil bhai, I still have time.
Yes, nice. You can go on.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay. So these are the choices that you have to make when you are translating, and why you are translating, because I think it is always very important to make a decision for why you are translating, because most often we may be translating for mercenary reasons. Okay, we might be translating for money. This is what happens in the translation industry that we have today. Okay, you have language services. Okay, there you have to translate for money. So you will be given a text, you have to translate, you will be paid according to the number of words that you have translated. But I think when we are doing English literature or any other Indian language as master's program, and we have a developed consciousness, I think it would be very difficult for us to translate for money. We will be translating basically for ideological reasons. And I will give you a few examples of what is that. So as Anil sir has pointed out, my first book of translation was actually a collection of short stories for children. Okay. And I will tell you what was the reason for those translations. So this was the book. I hope you are able to see it. And we actually translated this book for many reasons. One of the important reasons there was that I read a few Marathi short stories for children, which were basically written for children, but they were actually taking great dig at the adult world. In a way, the stories, although were written for children, but they were also exposing the agendas of the adult. So in other words, these stories were actually talking about how the adults have historically colonized the scene of the children's space. Okay, so how historically the adultist agenda has prevailed when it comes to dealing with children and also with children's literature. But there were some stories which were actually subverting the adultist agenda of the adult world in the stories that were written for children. Okay, so what we did, we translated those short stories from Marathi to Hindi initially, and it was published by Vani Prakashan. But then I also, just to give a feel of what was happening, I also translated a couple of them for translation today, and then wrote a note for them. Okay, so I hope it's visible. Yes, Anil bhai, are you able to see it?
Yes, Umesh.
Okay, thank you. So you can see that I actually translated as a sample of what we have done there from Marathi to English, Marathi to Hindi. Here I've translated two of them into English. And one story is Gachak Andhari by Ashok Mankar, and the other one is Dinu's Bill by Prahlad Keshav Atre. Okay. So you can Google it and see these two short stories for children in English translation here. But before that, I have actually written a translator's note. Okay. And this is something that I also wanted to draw your attention to, that whenever I translate something, I always try to support it with a translator's note, because having a translator's note also is an aid to the reader's understanding of what you are trying to convey, because we are not shying away from the fact that we are actually presenting a translated translation to the readers. We are not giving them an original, and there is always, there is always a chance that a translated text can be misinterpreted or misread by the readers. So in that sense, having a translator's note is always a very helpful kind of situation. Now, I don't know how much time I have, but I can read it and tell you what was the real politics at stake when we translated the Marathi children's stories into Hindi. So I'm just taking my liberty a bit too far, and I'm going to read this small document to actually tell you what is going on here. So can I do that, Anil bhai?
Yes, yes, sure. Before,
Oh, okay.
yes.
And I think it would be a great template for our young friends to also attempt a similar thing from their
Yes.
language. Okay. So I'm actually saying that these two stories are stories that are written for children, but they are very subversive. They are actually taking a dig at the adult world. And this is what I have done through the translator's note, because when you read the original stories, the readers tend to miss out the subversive part, the subversive element of those stories, because you know that literature can actually make great points by being ironical, by being sarcastic. So I'm saying, I'm actually appealing to readers that they must not dismiss these stories as mere children's stories. In fact, they are also important for the adult world. Okay. And I'm reading this translator's note, and I hope that it makes everything very clear. I must begin with a confession that I never had any interest in children's literature. My entry into the discipline is true serendipity. However, I am not the first and might not be the last either to have had such an experience. One is reminded of Mary Wollstonecraft, the radical author of A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, undergoing a similar experience. When Wollstonecraft began to learn German, she accidentally fell upon Christian Gottlieb Salzmann's Moralisches Elementbuch. She translated the book into English as Elements of Morality for the Use of Children. In her translator's preface of the said book, Wollstonecraft considers her translation effort to be a mere exercise in the German language of language learning. I carry a similar experience, though in my case, Marathi replaced German. Learning a language is not just restricted to mastering subject, object, predicate, or its other formal features alone. One cannot deviate from what one reads through language, its semantic and cultural context. It is while negotiating Marathi children's fiction as a component of language pedagogy that I began to reflect and examine my own naturalized biases towards children's literature. Further, it is during the course of co-translating a selection of Marathi children's literature into Hindi that I really began to appreciate the genre. It is not uncommon for the adults to have a trivialized view of children's literature. How paradoxical it is, then, that one of the most fascinating fields of adult inquiry, psychoanalysis, foregrounds the child and childhood as core specifics. Likewise, children's literature is normatively termed innocent, taking the readers away from reality, conservative, and an inevitable follower of resolution and redemption in its depictions. However, there are occasions where such stereotypes are challenged in children's literature. Contextualizing American children's fiction in the post-Columbus USA, Patnaik calls such tendencies to be examples of subversive innocence. Employing select American writings as trope, Patnaik passionately argues to lay bare the adultist agenda that attempts to conveniently push aside children's literature and therefore not worthy of attention. Pushing the traditional boundaries of innocence factor in children's literature towards a subversive paradigm, Patnaik in fact further foregrounds it to be a safety valve through which the mainstream writers present a critique of the dominant culture and its values. Two of Marathi children's fiction presented here can be cited as instances of subversive innocence in the Indian context. Gachak Andhari is a highly subversive story. The word Gachak Andhari is a value-free word and carries no meaning. It is an adult, Sada's invention to scare the child. It is very likely that in the Indian context, adults have been playing these tricks on children from times immemorial. In my language, Haryanvi, we have a word called habu. It will be a rewarding exercise to explore all such tricky words across Indian languages and see if there is a common thread among them. I guess in the absence of meaning, all such words rely on visual, oral, olfactory, and animation's effect embedded in them by their inventors. It is the senses, sounds, and images that create the effect on the readers and thereby generate meanings. Coming back to the story, Gachak Andhari comes into being to unsettle Sada's young son Gaja, but ends up haunting Sada, her inventor. Very quickly, the focus of the story shifts from the world of children to that of adults. Through his trick of imaginary, Gachak Andhari, Sada wishes to befool and frighten Gaja, but he himself ends up becoming helpless and terrified instead. Children's stories like Gachak Andhari lay bare the helplessness of adults in a world they themselves seem to control and dominate. With the hilarious turning of tables, the story subversively fractures adultist agenda unleashed against the child. Cashing on Sada's stupidity for a considerable time, the story amply demonstrates how adults can be implicated in their own tricks. Dinu's bill on the surface reads like a cliche children's story dipped in didactic agenda of the adults for children. Generations of readers have loved the story for Dinu's innocence. However, frequent readings of the story before the translation made me realize that Dinu's innocence is not innate. In fact, he fights for his innocence and claims it by implicating the adults, his father and mother, in his quest to understand the concept of bill devised by the adult world. Notwithstanding the mother-child bond, the story eventually exposes the gender division of labor in the adult world, though in a subtle manner. Dinu's bill is strongly rooted in reality. It does not take children away from reality, but to reality. The child characters in both the stories are inquisitive, a quality that implicates their superior adults. However, the reader will not take much time to discern that the child characters are themselves de facto implicated in the world they seek to subvert. Dinu and Gajanan both belong to the world they inhabit, but in a fractured way. The curiosity element in both Gajanan and Dinu perhaps is an attempt to own the adult world the way their parents do. The stories display how language is a crucial power channel for both children and adults. Imitating the language of the bill, an adult activity, Denu attempts to get closer to the world of adults. Sada, with his linguistic coinage of Gachakandhari, attempts to shut the adult world for Gajanan. Attempts of translation usually demand the closest reading of the text. I conducted close readings of the stories during the 2-year Marathi language course that I did at Banaras Hindu University. Therefore, I co-translated and published both the stories from Marathi into Hindi. While undertaking the English translation, I unfailingly felt the twining impact of Marathi and Hindi versions. However, for the sake of consistency, I have foregrounded the Hindi version as the source text here. It needs little explanation that while carrying the English version, the translator in me was, unconsciously or consciously, guided by the content, style of narration, and impact value of both Marathi and Hindi versions. With respect to the storyline, I have attempted to keep parallels with the original. With respect to language, my translation seeks to be similar but not identical to the source text. No two sets of language can be identical. English as a language, like all others, has her own rhythm. To me, it is the rhythm that ensures the readability. Thus, to ensure a hassle-free reading, heavy diction is deliberately dispensed with. However, an occasional heavy word is inducted consciously with hope. Hope should be central to all our translation attempts. In the present context, it is hoped that stories like these also possess the potential and possibility to make it to the school textbooks. In such a scenario, the introduction of a few unfamiliar but no less important words in the text shall enhance the linguistic capability, vocabulary building of the students. Footnotes, glossary, and italicization of words are heavily registered in translation unless absolutely necessary. Children have no respect and patience for such interventions within the text. Children possess a strong make-believe world. As a result, the speaking tiger and Gachakandhari are addressed with he and she pronouns in the English translation. While translating into Hindi, we were not able to look into the publication history of individual stories. I have attempted to fill the gap here by providing a detailed note about the publication timeline at the end of translations. So I hope that
Yes.
a bit of my politics is clear here as a translator. So I think one can go on and on with examples like this, but I think it is good time for me to stop and see
Yes,
if there are
yes,
some questions. Thank you.
yes. So thank you very much, Ms. Pai, for your very informative and knowledge of a practicing translator. It was good. It was really useful, and you told us about how the activity of translation. It is not just it's not just literal translation, obviously, but we have to involve. But at the same time, we cannot rewrite. The translator cannot rewrite the original work, but we have to create a similar work. At the same time, as Umesh, you have worked in the children's literature as well, as you told us about some difficulties that one has to face while translating the children's literature. But there are also one or two areas that are coming to my mind in the area of translation, for example, if you would like to answer, or your perspective. For example, one is that we have nowadays, multicultural world. And as you told, we have India, we are also so many languages and in India and also outside world. So what type of challenges do we face, in multicultural world, that multilingual world that we have in translation? Obviously, if we will have less languages, obviously, like, so we will have less problem. Or if we have more languages, so we can have, is this factor comes in while translating? Does it create any problem? This multilinguality or multicultural element of the modern times?
Yeah, I mean, Anil bhai, that is always there. I mean, I can give you a very quick example
Mhm.
that I am actually currently translating a story by Shiv Murthy ji, who is a very powerful contemporary Hindi writer.
Mhm.
And in one of his stories, there is a word called lamer. Okay.
Mhm.
Lamer means, an offspring who doesn't belong to the married partner,
Mhm.
but belongs to someone else. Although the married partners live together,
Mhm.
but the child belongs to someone else,
Mhm.
and the village is able to identify that this boy is actually not the biological, boy of her social father, but
Mhm.
he belongs to that person in the village. Okay, so the word lamer is very central to that story's capital. Okay, so the word lamer is actually used for such children in the context of that story. Now, for almost 2 years now, I'm actually struggling to find a word from
Yes.
English which could actually replicate that thing into English translation. And
Yes.
if you are not able to find out the word for that, I
Mhm.
think you will not be able to translate the story at all.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that is always, I mean, there. But I mean, as translators, I think we should keep on, trying and hope for something.
So then, as a translator, you see, meanwhile, we will keep on, you see, our discussion. So other listeners are also, you see, invited for their question answer. You can write down in chat box, or you can ask us the questions. So meanwhile, we'll keep on our discussion. So for example, you see, I was also trying a type of translation of some Haryana story I got from one of my friends from South Haryana. I will show you that one. We will discuss one. So, for example, as you told that if you don't find an equivalent word, see in English, for example, if I want to translate from Haryana to English, for example, there is a word you see, lugadi, that as we see in Haryana, that is maybe translated using as we say dupatta or chuni in English area, or in English I so try sakaf to see it. So then how shall we put it into translation? As I was thinking that I italicize the word original word, and then in bracket I can give English equivalent, or how shall we put that word into translation if I don't find equivalent in English literature?
Yeah, see, sometimes, I mean, for me as a translator, the most viable option is actually to keep the word lugdi as it is in the
Hmm.
original and also in the translation. And in the
Yes.
process, you can actually give a qualifier to the word lugdi in maybe one sentence or one sentence or two, where actually it becomes very clear to the readers as to the fact that the lugdi is actually basically some kind of a sartorial practice, or a clothing equipment, right? So I think one can negotiate with the cultural specific dress codes.
Mhm.
But sometimes, what I've said, like, you can say that the lugdi was not on her head, it was sleeping away. You can actually give qualifiers through which it becomes clear to the readers that it is something to do with the clothing part.
Yes, the cultural baggage that a word has. Yes, you are talking
Right,
about that.
right,
We
right.
have to convey that cultural baggage. That,
Yeah. So
yes.
it is very viable that one should keep the original and then
Mhm.
try to provide some qualifiers, because not keeping the original at times is also a violence to the source text.
Yes.
The capital of the source text gets heavily compromised if we
Mhm.
translate everything into an idiom which is
Mhm.
very foreign to the source text, isn't it?
Mhm. Yes, yes. So let's see some more questions in our, I think, chat box we have. So there is a, I think, question type. Translation in Indian languages have gained impetus. However, there remains gap in accessing non-fiction texts from Indian language. Kindly elaborate on this.
Yeah. I mean, this is a very genuine question, but
Hmm.
I'm really doubtful about this impetus quotient in translation, because I believe that even today, the translation projects are very homographic, in the sense that only a certain kind of transaction is happening, where good text from Indian languages, they are being translated into English. And such a transaction is not happening amongst Indian languages and also from the other foreign languages to Indian languages. So, translation activity is also a very powerful market-oriented kind of a situation. So you'll find that there is a lot of attention for the modern Indian writers to be available in English, but how many English texts are being translated into Indian languages? Very few. Maybe somebody that gets a Booker Prize or somebody who gets a Nobel Prize or something like that, but not as a habitual practice. And non-fiction, I mean, I absolutely agree with Devina that non-fiction thing will come later, because first of all, they are actually looking for a market where they can actually sell their translated books. And literature also have that entertaining capital. So the publisher believes that, if there is even in literary translations, there is a great hierarchy. People are not getting poetry translated. They are only getting novels and fiction translated much more. So it also depends. Yeah.
It means that the act of translation is also, somewhere controlled by the market or publishing agency. You want to say this thing. So
exactly.
So it means that if anyone wants to translate, for example, some classic, for example, if I want to translate John Milton, for example, Areopagitica, which is on this. So what type of response would there be? What do you think about it?
Well, Anil bhai, I have never thought about it, but I mean, I think if you're thinking of translating a figure like Milton, then you have to actually approach a body like Sahitya Akademi, which is not bothered about whether the translated books are sold or not sold. They can keep, they are powerful enough to keep all their books in their own space. So I think we have to actually approach a Sarkari kind of a sanstha, because the private publishers are very clear about the market potential of the text. That is so when you make a proposal for translation, you actually have to address this, that what would be the market potential of the text.
Consumption of the
exactly.
product, that is the important factor here.
Exactly.
Yes. So so there are other comments as well. In the in the meantime, so Umesh, would you like to tell us about some about the technology which is emerging, translating? Google Translation is also there, and then maybe other platform translation. So what do you think about this as well? Technology, what type of effect this technology is having? Because even today, yesterday, one of our students asked me in the class, sir, there is Google Translation, there are other modes of translation, then why should we go for Google Translation? So I told them, okay,
Google Translation is actually not a translation. It is actually to my mind, it is actually a tool that can help us to translate better. Because when we are talking about literary texts are heavily bounded by context, cultural context. Okay. So when we are translating, say, known cultural contextual things, for example, if you want to translate the name of a medicine into, Hindi or in any other local language, I think technology can help. Now, you also have to see that the technology that is available for translation now is a technology that actually helps the corporate world, or a technology that helps the market world, rather than the intellectual world. Or Anil bhai, you and me actually engage in an activity of teaching literary text, which does not show any tangible benefits all of a sudden. For example, if we teach William Wordsworth in the class, and after teaching, if we ask them how much change your mind is now after reading the text, I think our students will not be able to show anything. So we actually deal with things which are not in a tangible form, right? So I think when we are talking about literary text and their translations, I think we have to depend on the human hand for that. But I think for the market and for the corporate requirements, I think Google translation, or what they call as the corpus translation methods, they are handy. I mean, when you are dealing with technological tools. But literary translation is again, for example, it's like food. No, uh, if you want to purchase food online, still the food has to be cooked in the kitchen. The computer cannot cook the food for you. So
Yes. So,
kind of thing, yeah.
so I think yes, this Google translation has also this. It will also create a type of homogenization as well. The variety that we have in our languages, in our culture, that won't be represented or by the Google translation. That is one of the factors. So here we have one question from one of our students, I think, Kushdeep Kaur. Her question is, good afternoon, sir. Sir, my question for you is that how you get the exact word for the cultural words, how you get the exact word for cultural words, and how you tackle with the counter conflicts of Indianized English in translation. I myself had translated. I myself had translated certain poems from English to Punjabi. I had faced certain problems. Sir, can you suggest some ways in order to overcome those problems?
Yeah, I mean, this is a wonderful practical question by Kushdev. Yeah, so I think, I mean, what I do personally, that if I'm translating something, if I've translated, say, a paragraph or 3 pages or 4 pages, then after my first draft is over, I actually make a loud reading of my own translation. Because when you loudly read your own translation, you are actually able to see the roadblocks when you are reading out. Because sometimes what we miss in while translating, because translation most often is a very isolated exercise. You just sit down at one place and you are just rendering the text into other language. So reading aloud could be one method, Kushdeep, through which you actually get to learn about your own problems when you read aloud what you have translated. And then, I mean, as translators, I think we always have a well-knit group. Although these 2 books I have translated, but there are many people like Anil sir, who actually read my translations and gave their comments and said that although we have not read the original, but it is like not making much sense here, what you want to say. So translation is also a collaborative act. I think when you launch yourself as a full-time translator, you always wish to have 3-4 people who are able to read what you have translated. And yeah, and I also try to give that text to a person who understands both the original and my language of translation. So, for example, when I translated these short stories by Ram Darash Mishra ji from Hindi to English, I actually gave it to a couple of professors who have been teaching Hindi for a long time, but they also have great sort of respect and command over English. So that actually made life little easy for me. Of course, I think as translators, we would never be on a finality. Okay, we will never be on saying that this is final.
This is final text.
I think translation is always a tentative act, and translation is always an act that is always available for further improvement. Yeah.
Yes. So there is further.
Yeah. Kushdeep, I mean, Kushdeep has actually written a rejoinder, which is equally lovely. She's saying that, do you feel that, yeah, of course. I mean, something that I translated 5 years back, if I look at it today, I always feel that if I'm translating it today, I will definitely be translating it in a very different way. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
So there are Dr. Pinky Arora and Dr. Shantanu Ghosh. They have also, I think, some queries or some. Yes, sir, and madam. You can also join the discussion here. Most welcome.
Dr. Pinky Arora, you can go ahead first.
Yes, Dr. Pinky Arora also. Are you able to listen to ma'am, Dr. Pinky Arora?
You can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Are you there, ma'am, Dr. Pinky Arora? Yes, sir. I think Madam is not there.
But
So
then you can type the question in the chat box.
yes,
Uh, you can type the question in the chat box, and we can request Dr. Umesh to answer your query.
yes, sir. You want to say something, sir?
Meanwhile, when she is typing, Dr. Pinky is typing her question. So I have a small comment and a query for Dr. Umesh with regard to literary translation. I personally have engaged in a translation of two of Patrick White's novels several years back when I was still a postgraduate student in the university. And it came out of a project of going through, the nuances of Australian literature, which was one of our courses in our masters. And these two novels required a lot of understanding about the Australian landscape and the nuances of how the bush usually worked, and how it got, how the aboriginal sense of nature got into a colonial kind of a representation. So coming from this kind of an observation, what I want to ask you, as part of the tradition of literary translation, how do you think, or what is your reaction in trying to make a cultural translations, this intercultural translations, so to speak?
Yeah.
You actually gave an example, a very good example in the very beginning of your talk, by demonstrating through your translated poem 3 different versions how it came about. We face these questions every day when you go to the class and say, for example, we are teaching daffodils to the students of English literature in the first year, and they're not being exposed to the landscape, the English landscape. So it kind of impedes their understanding of the ethos of that. And just a couple of days ago, there was a question by one of the students regarding very same concept of how do we make these kinds of equivalences. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Professor Shantanu, you have already given an answer to the question that you are raising. And I think when we are thinking of translating a book across cultures, I think it becomes some kind of an inevitable requirement that we understand that culture. I mean, although we usually don't think about it, but when I'm listening to a question, I'm actually thinking about it, that unconsciously I actually know the culture of the two languages very well that I'm translating. Had I not been part of that cultural setup, I think it would have been really difficult for me to translate those texts. And not only the culture, I think I will just very, very politely add to your question that not only culture, but also the history of languages that we are operating in. For instance, even today, when we are trying to translate something from other language to Marathi, we actually have that anxiety of influence, that how that word was used by our literary masters in Marathi. So apart from the cultural baggage that we carry, I think we also have a huge baggage of the history of literature, history of how the language evolved in that particular transaction. So any Marathi reader, for example, or translator, would be very conscious as to how Sant Namadev used that word when he was writing or when he was speaking in his own time. So you are absolutely right that when we are doing these transactions, we are not only doing transactions at the literary level or at the linguistic level, but predominantly at the cultural level as well. And most often that cultural capital goes unconsciously in the process of translation.
Yes. So
Absolutely, I agree with you.
yes, thank you.
So now, Dr. Pinky, maybe you can join us
Yes.
and
Yes.
make yourself
Uh,
Good
known.
afternoon, everyone. Yes, sir. Am I audible to you?
Yes,
Yes.
Dr. Pinky, can you
Uh,
also mention your affiliation, your institution where
yes,
you
sir.
belong?
Sure. So, I'm an assistant professor at Central University of Haryana. And I just got to know about this conference through one of my colleagues. And I'm really, really feeling delighted that I could join the session. Wonderful presentation, and hats off to Dr. Umesh for the efforts and the work he has been putting on into this translation. And I would also like to share, but because recently I am also into translation and I'm working with AICT and SWAYAM portal for translation of the humanities text into Punjabi language. And I've been working for these scripts recently for past 2-3 months. So I would really see that I'm working for the non-fiction part. So I mean, I really understand the ordeals one has to go for when you translate things, but these ordeals increase when you move from the non-fiction to the fiction part. And one thing I would like to ask, because I not only do these translations, but I do translations for my university itself when I have to go for press note translations, and that I do round the clock and round the year. So then I understand, because whenever I try to tamper with the the content of the note or the content of the text that has been shared with me, I'm really asked that you should not do that. I mean, I really have to literally like translate each and every word with no change. That what Umesh sir has mentioned in the starting, that you should not be doing any injustice to the original creator. And
Ma'am,
when
I would like
sometimes
to
you
just,
really feel when you're translating.
sorry, ma'am, I
Yes,
would
sure,
just
sir.
like to interject. If, I think you have hit the nail in the head, because you cannot do a piece of translation without understanding the text. It would be a sacrilege, and it would be suicide for the translator to do just that. When we are restricted to the translation, just mechanical translation is it's a injustice done to the process of translation as well. So if just you have to the
Yeah,
crux of
that's
the
right.
argument.
yes. Dr.
And
Umesh.
if I really, because I have been through all this from past 3 years. And when I really try to do something, because I feel that I can make it more polished in my language, I can make it more polished in this way. So I really get to know that no, that this particular content has been prepared in Hindi, and you have to exactly convert that into English with no ifs and buts and no addition of yours. And similarly, now I'm translating from English to Punjabi. So then I realized that, your hands are tied. You're speechless at points that you think, for example, the 3 versions that Dr. Umesh has shared about that ARG poem. And then that was very correct that the first draft and the final draft, they were absolutely different, along with the draft that was shared by the student, which was more polished. And then you realize, you're charged with that. So what should we do exactly when we really sit? I would really ask Dr. Umesh that what we really need to keep in mind when we are really going for that kind of a translation. Because I know German well. I have learned German also. So moving on further, I'll be moving with the German translations also. So I really want to learn this, that what we need to keep in translate. What points we need to keep in mind at that point.
To be very honest, there is no set answer for that. And the translator has always been a subject of suspicion, to be very honest. And that also speaks about the political economy that a translator carries. And this suspicion is not very recent. In fact, in the Latin sort of sources, you'll find that a translator was called a traitor. Okay, translator traitor. Okay, so I think we actually have to negotiate these problems. And I think that is the reason that I was talking about the translator's note and its importance, because it also makes it very clear to the readers as to what kind of stance that we are taking as translators. So a translator's note is some
I'm
kind
in a
of
meeting right. Come back later.
yeah.
Here, thank
That's
you,
what.
Umesh bhai, for your answer. I think Dr. Pinky would satisfy. So there is just one, I think, last question from one of our student, Akash Deep. It seems to me interesting. So you can also see in the chat box. It is about the you see, use of words or vocabulary. For example, he has given an example of Sasitharo. So as he says, he uses very weird words like is here. You see newly coined words, you see, which are mentioned here in the chat box, defense trait, and different types of words which you can see here in chat box. So he asks, you see, how role of vocabulary, how do we deal with such type of words you see in translation? Can you see the chat box?
Yeah,
Please?
yeah. I'm just trying to locate that.
By Akash Deep Singh. So,
Dr. Tharoor, I mean, I think he would be a nightmare for any translator.
yes.
And thank God he's writing in English. So he won't need much translation as such, because people need translations into English. So yeah, but I mean, Akash, thank you so much for the question, but I'm really not sure whether I have the capability to answer this question. So I would like to duck on this question.
So yes, thank you, Miss. It was really very interesting session, interesting dialogue discussion with you. Now I would like to invite our faculty colleague, Dr. Lois Joss, for concluding remarks. Yes, Dr. Lois Joss.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. 100 plus minutes, and after for almost these many minutes, we had a good discussion on translation. And in fact, all the academic discussions that ask you to take a break from your regular academic activities and to sit back, listen, take part in such talks, they're all encouraging, enriching. And on behalf of the Department of English Studies at Cal University and the Literary Society, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all for their presence and contribution to make this webinar a great success. I remember the day when Kushdeep, our MS student who asked a question today, who approached Anil sir asking for organizing a seminar. The enthusiasm which they showed, in fact, prompted Anil sir to go forward with this idea and decided to conduct a talk on translation, considering some of their major core papers in both BA and MA. The moment the topic got decided, I did not see any kind of doubt in Anil sir's eyes, like in calling Umesh sir as a resource person. And today I'm happy that we got the right person. Even when I started attending this program, I expected an usual introduction to translation, but now I'm happy, for I myself could take something back. Mesari, in fact, you have touched most of the points like translation, translation studies, the various organizations, kinds of translation works, translation in literature, etc., the process of translation, the politics behind its technicalities, the difficulties, how to overcome. Thank you, sir, for giving such a comprehensive talk, bringing out in such a beautiful manner. I'm sure everyone here got something to take back. Thank you. A special thanks to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Gurmail sir, Registrar, Dean Academic Affairs, for allowing us to hold such an event and extending support in all possible ways for making this a successful event. I thank Dr. Shantanu sir, our head of the department, for all the guidance and support. My dear colleagues, Farhan sir, Preeti ma'am, Binderpal ma'am, and Parul ma'am. Thank Dr. Anil sir, the Secretary of Literary Society, and his team who were working behind to make this webinar a reality. I thank all the participants from our department, from our university and from outside universities. Thank the IT department for hosting and broadcasting this program live. I thank all the participants of the program. Thank you everyone once again. Thank you for making this webinar a success.
Okay, thank you, Umesh bhai.
Thank you, Anil sir, and thank you everyone for being so patient and being here. And I'm very thankful to the organizers for giving me this wonderful opportunity so that I could share some of my uh, evolving thoughts on translation practice. So thank you so much. Thank you so much to Professor Shantanu Ghosh sir as well for being so kind and welcoming. And of course, Anil sir has a right on me to call me at any time and force me to give a talk. So
Yes.
thank you so much.
Okay. Yes.
So
Okay.
it was a lovely experience with Dr. Umesh, who shared his own personal, bits, which actually transformed this, translated this, I say, into a category of talk where people really enjoyed being here. And listening to this, I'm sure that the students who attended and other faculty members, faculty colleagues, and our guests from other institutions must have had a really, really nice experience and take-home message from this. We hope to have many such interactions in the future, and hopefully in the next semester, if the situation would permit us, we are also intending to hold a national level seminar on translation theory and practice. So we look forward to that day when all of us would come to our small institution and enrich our academic lives with your erudite talks. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you very much, miss. See you.